Good evening and welcome to UK Crime Book Club. This evening I'm delighted to be joined with Heather Critchlow and Heather's third book in the series, Unsound, is out now. I can't actually trying to get my fingers. There we go. That's better. Thank you for joining us, Heather. It's great to have you on. So I'm just checking to make sure we are actually, yes, we're all live. That's good. All good. Right. So, yes, thank you for joining us. So, as I said, this is the third book in your series. Would you like to introduce yourself and your books?
Yeah, sure. I'm Heather Critchlow, and my series is about a true crime podcaster called Cal Lovett. And in the first book, Cal travels to Aberdeenshire to investigate the cold case of a missing woman who rides her horse into the woods and doesn't come out. And then in every book after that, Cal is in a different location in Scotland, investigating a different cold case. But he has a missing sister. We start the book where his sister has been missing for 35 years. She vanished when he was only 9 years old, and that's really influenced his life a lot. And so through each of the books, we kind of have a development in his own personal case, as well as a kind of cold case that's wrapped up within the individual book.
Yeah, they're great. I mean, it's I really like cold case. Was that something that sort of you were drawn to when you sort of thought about writing a book, that was the sort of area you wanted to go into?
Yeah, I really wanted to write a podcast book because I was listening to a lot of true crime podcasts, and I was really interested in just bringing back these kind of voices of people who'd been forgotten. And I think understandably, the police have limited resources, and if a case 20, 30 years down the line, you do see them being reopened when there's new evidence. But my guess is that there are a lot of people out there who think they've got away with something, and I do like the idea that a person with an iPhone could come along and decide to make a podcast about an old case and find new things. So that was really where I started. I really wanted to look into that, because I think there's quite a lot of interesting dynamics around time really changing people's perspective. And I wanted to play with that a little bit.
And I guess as well is the perspective, but also things change, don't they? Things, life, just thinking about some sort of cold cases that I can remember from around here. And you sort of think how the families, can't move on, and it's just must be just awful living in that limbo of of trying to carry on with life but not being able to because there's something missing, and not knowing what happened to them, or in that case.
I think that's probably one of the worst kinds of pain for people, is just not knowing. At least when you have the knowledge of something. I mean, that's one of the themes of the books, really. Is it better to know, or sometimes is it more painful to know what's happened to your loved one? But yeah, it's really something that Cal tries to get to the heart of, because he knows from it's his whole life, really, since he was 9 years old. They just haven't known what's happened to his sister. And the damage that I think I'm much more interested in victims and victims' families, really, than I am in the perpetrators themselves, because I think there's such ripples of crime. And it's not just the immediate family, it sort of spans generations and really affects people. So yeah, it is sad.
Was that really, really sad, really, and really difficult to move on from, and to have any sort of sense of normality. And I can understand why why he almost feels like he needs to sort of try and if he can't find out what happened to his sister, what is he going to be able to find out what happened to somebody else's sister or brother or mum or dad or whatever.
And I think for him there are different layers of it through the books, because he does start to find things out. And so you kind of see, okay, well, what is it like to know this, or what's it like to try and seek justice in this way? And I don't want to spoiler it, but it's not as straightforward as find his sister's body, get the answers. It's sort of the beginning of a journey in a way.
Yeah, and I think that because obviously we're talking about book 3, and we don't want to give any spoilers away for book 1 and 2 as well. So this is a spoiler-free chat, which everybody will be pleased to know. And so we always like to try and sort of keep it as. I'm just looking at the comments. We've got lots of people watching. So Patricia says, Heather, you've been on her radar for ages, and she's now has Unsolved and is now reading. Laura's on the bus. Laura reads a lot of she reads some of the books on is it Pigeonhole, where you get the staves every day?
Yes, yeah. Unsolved has just been on Pigeonhole, so
yeah. So she's been reading that, and she loved the podcaster as the protagonist. So Sarah saying she loves your book. So yeah, you've got a lot of love and hi from Angela as well. So yeah, we've got busy group in tonight. So watch, there'll be probably some questions in a second as well. So I'll keep an eye on those. Brilliant. So when you what was your sort of journey to being published to sort of get to where you are now, and have written 3 books?
Really long. Yeah, so many people have these stories, don't they? I mean, I started writing when I was about 17. I finished a full-length manuscript when I was about 20, and I sort of naively polished it up and sent it off to agents and thought this was me. I was going to be an author, and obviously that didn't happen. There was a lot wrong with that manuscript. So I did a few courses and sort of started to learn about creating fiction and writing fiction. But then I had my job, I had kids, life kind of got in the way, and I was always writing in the background, but sort of not really doing anything with it until about 6 years ago, when I went on a writing course, and I was sort of determined to kind of give it a try, really, and that it not being published wasn't going to happen because I didn't try. It was, it's obviously out of your hands. So, but then you had to have a full-length manuscript to go on that course that you then worked on, and that manuscript did get me an agent, but it didn't. We went out and it didn't get picked up. So I wrote another book, and that didn't get picked up either. And then I wrote Unsolved. So actually, Unsolved is the 5th book I've written, but the first one published. So it's been a long.
That takes some stamina. That is really impressive. Because I mean, how did you obviously had that sort of that sort of, what's the word I'm trying to think of, like determination and that the determination to not be, because a lot of people would have gone after book 1, oh well, it's not for me, but you didn't do that. You went, no, I am going to succeed. And that's really admirable, because you could have just like put it in a drawer and gone, okay, that it wasn't meant to be, and moved on. So
I had a lot of ups and downs with it, because I did a course in my 20s where I got a really horrible rejection. I was doing a course, and then there was a sort of step up that you could kind of pay to do a bigger course. And I submitted some work in a cover letter and everything for that. And I was rejected in a really weird way. And actually, the person that was tutoring me in the course I was doing kind of came back and said they disagreed, and it all got a bit messy. And I didn't write for 2 years after that. I was just convinced. Wow. And I never used to tell anybody that I wrote. It was a sort of deep, dark secret. I was really kind of ashamed of my writing, and I didn't think. So it's been quite a long journey of then. It was a really big deal for me to tell anybody that I wrote. And then so I went and did this course, and that was a really big thing for me, to sit in front of other people and read my work. But actually, I really wish I'd done that sooner and got to know other writers sooner. And you get so much support, and you learn to deal with criticism, and you learn to separate the good criticism and the useful criticism from the kind of unconstructive stuff. So yeah, in a way, I'm not sure how equipped I would have been if I'd been one of these authors who'd written a novel, sent it to an agent, got a massive deal, suddenly is a really good. I don't know how well equipped I would be to deal with that. I think my sort of slow entry is quite nice.
Was it they say about what doesn't kill you makes you stronger, sort of thing? Is definitely I mean that sort of criticism. I mean, I'm terrible at being I've always, when I did essays and things, I used to take it really personally, and I have tried to learn as I've got older that it's not personal, it's not me they're having a go at, it's what I've written. But I guess when you've written a book, that's even more, because they are your characters, they are your world that you've developed, and you want people, like, I guess, you want them, ultimately every author wants people to pick up their books and enjoy them, or even just pick them up, I guess.
Yes, that's true. I think also I was a journalist, so I was really good at taking criticism on my journalism. And I found it really frightening because I guess you're right, it's very personal. I think I'm a lot better. I like to think I'm a lot better at that now. Certainly in the editing process, I don't have any problem. I send it off, and it almost at that moment, you sort of separate it from you a bit, and it stops being my thing, and it's now this is a product and everybody's helping make it better. But yeah, I suppose we all say that, and then everyone gets blindsided by a horrible review at some point, and it's just part of it. Not everyone is going to like what you write, and that's fine.
No, exactly. And I think, I review as well, and I always try to be kind in my reviews, and if I don't like a book, I won't review it, because I think I see people tagging authors, and I'm like, no, don't do that. That's just don't. If you don't like it, it's fine. I'm not saying that you shouldn't dislike books, but I also think you should be kind.
Just don't tag the author.
Exactly. Don't tag the author. So the other books that you had before this, was it crime? Was it similar? Have you always sort of wanted to write crime, or was it different?
I didn't really know sort of a lot about genre before I went and did this course. The book I was writing then was much more of a mixture of, it kind of had a little bit of historical, sort of speculative, ghostly edge to it, and crime as well. So I was really pleased when I was sort of told, you can sit in the crime genre, because it's a really nice world, and there's so many events and lovely reviewers and other authors. It's a really supportive community. But yeah, I have another novel coming out next year that's more of a speculative thriller, so it's sort of crime adjacent rather than pure crime. But yeah, I do love crime fiction, and I just think there's so much scope within it for different kinds of stories, and I just don't think you're ever constrained within crime, either in the style of writing or in the kind of subject. You have really action-packed crime or really literary crime. So
yeah, I think there is so many genres, and there's so many ways. I always think that I'm always surprised how many sort of chats we have, and how many books there are, how many people are in the group, and how many authors that we have on that write books, and they're all so different. They can be similar in sort of the genre within the crime, police procedural, or cozy crime, or whatever, but actually they're all, and I think that's why we all love them, because they are so diverse, and you can, although crime is a massive sort of umbrella, there's so many bits and strands in it, isn't there? So
yeah, I think there's common themes, and often crime is so well sort of plotted and crafted. And I do love those elements about it. But yeah, it's a really nice genre to be in, actually, despite the the darkness of the subject matter.
Yeah, I think we all love that, don't we? That's the thing, isn't it? It's like, with Unbound, you've got you're looking at a sort of another missing person, aren't you, Aaron, who disappeared 12 years ago, and his parents sort of want to they want to know what happened, and I was sort of interested how that sort of came about, how you sort of, what inspired you to go down that sort of route.
Well, the first two books had female victims, so I wanted to write a male victim. And I'm quite interested in, I suppose, all of my victim characters are in some way kind of either difficult to like, or possibly wouldn't get the attention that other victims might get. So the victim in the first book, she's hard to like. She's a very difficult character. And I was kind of interested in how, do you have to be the perfect victim to get the right media? The second book has a mother who's really struggling with motherhood. That might be quite a difficult read for people in some ways. She's not 100% easily likable. And then I kind of wanted to have a male victim, and I thought, well, a male student, he's technically an adult. I mean, he's not really, he's literally just left home, but he's not going to get the column inches in the newspaper. He's not, a small child who's going to capture the hearts. He's a fully grown man, effectively. And so I think that's something his parents have to wrestle with, is that, people think, well, he's just gone off, or he's just, to them, he's their child still. So that's where that sort of came from, really. And there was a particular case that I was interested in that sort of inspired me a little bit, but it was a very specific case with a very specific answer. And I thought, well, I can't, if I if I do anything like that, it's going to be immediately obvious. There is no real other answer. And so we start the book with not even a body. So we don't even know if he's dead. We don't know if he's missing through his own free will, or if he's died at his own hand and not been found, or if something's happened to him. And so the odds are kind of stacked against Cal, and he's taken the case. There's stuff going on in his personal life, and he's taken the case kind of under duress in a way, really. He gets captured by Aaron's story, and his own daughter is, I don't think it's a spoiler to say that his own daughter is going to university, and she's going to university in Edinburgh, and Aaron went missing in Edinburgh. So he sees it as a great opportunity to be working in the city where his daughter's starting her new life. She's not that thrilled.
No. You wouldn't be, would you? Like, you're trying to escape and then your mum or dad coming with you.
Yeah, he didn't really think that through. But those parallels between his own daughter's experience and Aaron's experience of, and we see it from, all of my books have the victim's perspective as well. And so we see Aaron starting university, and we see the friendships that he makes and how everything kind of unfolds from his point of view.
Yeah, it's great. It's really gripping. And Laura's saying that Layla was very difficult to like. Was she one of your earlier characters? Because I've only read this one.
Yeah, she's the victim in the first book, and she is deliberately quite. I have a lot of love and sympathy for Layla, because I think she's a woman ahead of her time. She's trapped. She's trapped at a time where she doesn't have many options, financially, socially. She does some pretty awful things, but she's somebody in pain and somebody who doesn't see a way out, I think.
I think it's interesting. I think it's more interesting to read a character that you don't like, because I quite like to sort of get into the sort of, like you said, the psychology of why they're not likable, because generally people have a reason, unless they're written in a way that they're just, really awful. But but then I think it makes the book more interesting, isn't it, if if they were just really lovely, and there wouldn't be that sort of interest in, why was she like that, or why did she say that, or why did she do that, sort of thing.
I think we're all so complex and flawed, and nobody's perfect, so it's quite interesting to explore the things that people do. I mean, in the fourth novel that I'm writing at the moment with Cal, I'm not going to spoil or anything, but Cal kind of does something slightly out of character and spends quite a lot of time beating himself up, and I think that's an interesting angle to explore with him.
I was talking about him, so how did he sort of come about, and how is he, without sort of giving spoilers, how has he developed, or how have you developed him, and how has he grown himself on the journey of the books?
So he kind of came. There's a Canadian podcaster called David Ridgen, who has a series called Someone Knows Something, and quite a lot. I was listening to that before I wrote these books, and I really liked his style. He has kind of a poetic style. He really kind of crusades for justice. He's done several different cases, and they're set in he goes to remote places in Canada, and I didn't feel that I could write about Canada. I don't know it well, but I grew up in Aberdeenshire, and so that was the sort of starting point for Scotland is still somewhere. We were talking about this before we came on, about where there are still wild, untamed places where, you can get completely lost and be away from civilization. So that was the sort of reason to set it there. And Cal, I suppose in a way, David Ridgen was a sort of inspiration for Cal. One of the first scenes I wrote is still in the first book, about Cal packing up to go off and investigate a case, and he's arguing with his wife, and she is saying, look, if you go, I think this is over, you can't walk away. And I wondered what would make somebody so driven to seek justice for other people that they would almost damage their own life in the process. And so that's where Cal's backstory came from, this kind of drive. And developing him is interesting. He's quite damaged in some ways, but then in other ways he's really his sister was quite strong and independent and didn't get on with their parents as a result. But she's almost the blueprint for the kind of woman that he gets on well with. He is surrounded by strong women and he's not intimidated by strong women. He has a really good relationship with his daughter, despite encroaching on her beginning of the university.
Yeah.
And I really like exploring those elements. And of the things that the sort of life stages, I suppose, that he goes through. So, he's facing marriage breakdown in the first book.
Yeah.
His daughter's going to university in the third book. There's all sorts of sort of personal life development.
Yeah.
Yeah. And so, yeah, that's quite interesting. I am approaching a sort of, because I've drafted the fourth book and I'm working on that, and then there will be one more. And so I think I'm going to have some interesting questions to ask myself about where I want to leave him at the end of the 5 books.
That's because that's when I was going to ask you, and actually I'm just going to see who it was that asked. Sarah said, do you sort of see yourself writing a different book series with new characters and locations? And I was going to ask, sort of alongside that, is, did you always know it was going to be a series when you started, when you sort of moved over to that book? Did you know that you'd be writing 5 books?
No, because I was much more used to books being rejected at that stage than I was to anything being accepted. So I'd written a paragraph for a second book so that my agent could submit it to publishers. But I mean, that paragraph was ridiculous. It wasn't even, I think it sort of set up a plot, and then it said something like, and then something happens which changes everything. I didn't know what the something was. I didn't know any of that, because I didn't know I'd have to write that. Well, then they came back and said, and could you write a synopsis for a third one as well? So I was really stuck, because over a weekend they said, could you just send us a bit more information on this second book? So I spent a weekend going, oh God, I need a plot for a second book. And then they said, and could we have a paragraph for a third one as well?
Oh, that's quite pressure, isn't that? It's quite a lot of pressure, isn't it, really, to sort of go from, this is probably a standalone to 3 books later.
Yeah, I mean, what I submitted for that paragraph of the third book bears no resemblance to the book. Luckily, my publishers are really flexible. They don't hold me to that sort of thing. I think it was more, do you have enough ideas to take this on? Yeah. Because they don't just want one, and readers don't just want one. But in terms of, so there'll be the 5 for Cal. I'm writing this speculative thriller will be out. It's called The Tomorrow Project, which will be out in May. The 4th Cal book will be out next September. And then there'll be another kind of dystopian speculative thriller and the 5th Cal book. And then, yes, something else. But I've got to work out those ones first.
That's quite a lot, isn't it? You're busy. Do you write full time now?
No, I have quite a flexible day job, and I do corporate writing, and I have fewer clients. I work for myself, but I have fewer clients than I used to have, and I've kind of been able to sort of balance that a bit. But no, I do still have the day job, like the day job, and want to keep that. So yeah, it's a bit of a juggle around the edges of it all.
Yeah, that's like a lot of headroom there's going on with 2 more books coming, and also I guess from a sort of that sort of keeping track of the series, has that been sort of how easy is that, or how difficult is that to sort of keep track of what Cal did in book 1?
That's I haven't, because it's only been 3. It's not been too bad so far.
No.
But I do have moments where I go to write, he looked into her whatever color eyes, and then I have to pick up one of the other books and go, right, what color eyes has she got again? If I was sensible, I would have created a spreadsheet with all of these details on that I could check. But I did actually start one and never used it. So yeah.
Yeah, I guess like when you say if you got to like 20 books, I imagine you need to have something like that, because you would just you'd go mad trying to remember everything that happened in book 1, because that's a long time, isn't it? Because I mean, I imagine you write maybe 1 book a year, and then it's got to go for editing, and then it's so it's not like it was 3 years ago sort of thing. It's I can't remember what happened yesterday.
It is funny because you sort of move on, I suppose, and now I'm talking about book 3, but my head is very much in book 4. So yes, you gotta stop and go, right, what are we talking about?
what's your sort of, you mentioned about, you know, listening to sort of true crime podcasts and things. What do you sort of do for your research? You know, what's sort of, are you a sort of a down a rabbit hole researcher, or are you more sort of, you know?
I tend to start writing and then sort of fill in the gaps of, so in, for example, in the third book, one of the key locations is Leith, and the Leith kind of docks area, which is regenerating in Edinburgh. And there's a particular warehouse that's an important kind of location. And that is based on an old, the Imperial Dock warehouse that's been demolished. It was demolished a few years ago, but some urban explorers went there before it was knocked down. And so I was able to go online and see a lot of photographs of what it was like in the building. Someone had taken a video when they sort of snuck in and been around it. So I find things like that really inspiring. I went to the area. So my best friend from school was at university in Edinburgh. And so I spent quite a lot of time with her, like at the Millennium. We waitressed at the Millennium in Edinburgh. And so I kind of drew on quite a lot of the students. I knew that it needed to be a big university town and in Scotland, and that gave me really Edinburgh or Glasgow. And I don't know Glasgow well, and I do know Edinburgh quite well. So I knew it would be Edinburgh. And then I went back and just walked the old kind of haunts. I walked up to the halls of residence at Pollock under Arthur's Seat. I walked past where my friend used to live and the flat she lived in. I went and actually stayed in Leith, which, because that's such a key area. And then I walked the Water of Leith walkway into Edinburgh and just kind of soaked up as much atmosphere as I could, really. And so I tend to do that sort of thing. I'll write, work out what I need to know, and then go and try and find it. I think the fourth book, which I'm working on now, will be a lot more complicated. There's a lot more, I've set myself up a little bit. There's sort of some historical details. There's 2 or 3 different kind of police elements or body search elements that need to be. So I think I will be doing more research for the fourth book, but I will reverse engineer it in. I'm writing what I need to write, and then I'm going to go back and alter the details, I think.
Tweak it, yes. Do you find sort of this, because you said we did talk about before we came on about, you know, that you grew up in sort of Scotland from sort of you know, well, not teens, but before teens, so you know Scotland well, and that sort of setting sort of really lends itself, doesn't it, to the sort of crime genre. But was it helpful having, like you said, about going around to university, and do you think that you could set a book where you didn't know it? Do you like to know where it is?
I like to know a bit, but I'm always wary of, you know, I don't live in the places that I'm writing about, and so I don't want to kind of get things really wrong, or I don't want people who live there to think that's not an accurate representation. No. So for the second book is set on the west coast of Scotland, which is somewhere I visited only on holiday. But so I sort of created a fictional, it's like a kind of inspired by Plockton and the Shieldig Peninsula, but it isn't either of those places. It's there, but it's, and things like the Applecross Pass is in there, but Cal is an outsider. And so it's kind of taking Cal's perspective, and Cal's going into a place. So I suppose that makes it slightly easier. I mean, Aberdeenshire with the first book is where I grew up. So I knew the locations there really, really well. And my family is still there and I still visit. And so that was kind of easier, I suppose. And then it's really just sort of inspiration hits. Like the fourth book, there's a particular case, I don't know if people have read about it, fairly recently, where a man was found on a hillside. He died. And nobody knew who he was and where he came from. And even in this day and age, it took a couple of years to find out that he travelled from Pakistan. And, you know, it wasn't straightforward. And so that was, I usually start with a case like that and then take something completely different. And that's just a thought that then, you know, I try not to kind of copy existing cases. And so I then found sort of somewhere where I wanted to set that's somewhere I went to a long time ago. But I've been back for a holiday with my kids and I've taken them. I knew there was this little lochen up in the hills that was really important. So I was like, right, kids,
off we go.
It's 5 hours, the kids and the dog and I, and eventually we came to this location. And that was just really interesting. I'd already written quite a few scenes there and they weren't wrong, but the atmosphere I now have in my head is really nice for that place. It's a very eerie place. So yeah.
There's a comment on here, but I've disappeared. But saying about book 4 sounds really interesting. Can you tell us any more about book 4?
It might change. Nobody except me has read book 4. It's not finished, but yes. So the premise of this one is that there was a body of a woman, an older woman, found in the hills 20 years ago. So before some of the scientific advances that we would have access to now were around, and she was buried in a grave near Loch Tay. No one knows who she was or why she was there. And 20 years on, a local woman wants to try and find out who this woman was, and believes that using modern techniques and a combination of modern techniques and genealogy as well, because I was quite interested in the use of that sort of attempt to people like the Golden State Killer, who were identified because their DNA of a distant relative kind of pops up, and you use family history to kind of get to people. And so those are threads that kind of are weaved into. And then the reason that this woman was on the hill is what we need to try and find out.
It's really interesting, isn't it, with the cold cases, because like you said, the technology has moved on so much that although they've been forgotten, sort of being able to be brought out again, and sort of, I guess there has to be something that triggers that somebody has to either have new evidence or somebody wants to have an interest in it. Is that sort of how it works, really? That's what...
And actually, one of the interesting things about this case in the 4th book is that this woman doesn't have anybody to advocate for her or fight for her, because they don't know who she is. And so it's really only because the local woman has been haunted by her case and the fact that, you know, she died alone and they don't know who she is.
No.
He pushes for it. And then Cal and his team are able to sort of push for it as well and try and identify her. And the sort of step 1 is to identify who she is. And step 2 is then to work out, well, what was she doing there, and why has nobody missed her?
Have you as Cal has sort of grown and progressed, do you like him more now than when you started? Have you become fond? You know, are you fond of him? Does he annoy you at times? You know, I imagine he annoys you at times when you're writing and he maybe doesn't do what you want him to do.
Yeah, I don't really know. I think I'm just so familiar with him that I don't really even see him so much. I don't know what he looks like. People ask me what he looks like, and I have no idea.
Yeah,
my visual, I see through him, so I can see what he sees, but I can't see him. And other people I see a bit more. I suppose I felt at times a bit constrained because I can't just veer off in a weird angle with him. He's got a character arc now. He's got questions that need to be answered. And depending on which book I've written, a couple of times I felt a bit constrained, but actually now it's quite nice because I've written a different book in between that was quite complicated and different. To come back to Cal was quite relaxing, because then sort of 50% of what's going to happen in the book is kind of preordained, really, because I know the character, I know where we're going, and then I've got a new cold case to play with, which is less intimidating than just starting with a blank page, I think.
Yeah, and I guess, you know, with those sort of characters, coming back to sort of familiar people and makes it, I wouldn't say it's easy because I've not written a book, but I mean, it makes it more, I guess, just nice to come back to. I know other authors have said about, you know, returning to familiar characters is a nice part of the process, you know, familiar characters and also familiar settings. Going back to same places can be the same.
Yeah. I think, had you asked me while I was writing this 3rd book, would I miss him at the end, I would have said no. The 3rd book was a nightmare to write. It was just, whereas now I'm like, oh, I might miss him actually.
So what do you sort of find the easiest part of writing, and what do you find the most difficult?
I like editing. I find
it's quite unusual.
Yeah, well, I was a sub-editor as a journalist. That was my first job.
There you go.
And a reporter. And I like having a thing that I can make better. The first draft for me comes with a bit of anxiety, I think, about, is this going to hang together? Is this going to work? But once I've got something, even if it's an imperfect whole, which I currently have for the fourth book, it just sort of feels like I've got somewhere to go with it. And I think it just takes the pressure off a little bit. So yeah, the first draft is the slog for me.
That's the difficult bit.
Yeah.
Laura said that she's recently read Shallow Graves by Ray Fish, who was a senior forensic scientist for Met, and the work he did with university academics really helped the cold cases and helps cases today, and was really fascinating with the new techniques they brought in. I think I really like that idea of, like, you know, being able to sort of go back into the past but bring it into the present is I think that's really interesting. And I guess, do you find it difficult writing with the technology, or, you know, because obviously it's current and, you know, everything is so immediate and rapid? Can that be a challenge when you're writing?
Yeah, I think it's more of a challenge in this fourth book because, unfortunately, because I don't really want to write at this stage police procedurals, and I don't have in-depth knowledge of that. And so the problem is anything that's developed in a case will bring the police back in. So I think in the fourth book, I'm very much trying to use certain technologies that I've read about or have been discussed in podcasts for cold cases. But yeah, it's I suppose it's always things like mobile phones and all those sorts of things. You've just got to try, and there's always ways to make sure what you need to happen can happen. It's just thinking it through. And a lot of people are doing really interesting things with technology, I think, in crime books. So it can be useful as well.
Does it make it more difficult to write as a sort of, you know, private investigator sort of type character than a police, because obviously they don't have the means that the police have, so they have to use other techniques unless they've got, you know, a sort of a sidekick as a police officer or something? Does that sort of limit you sometimes, do you think?
It hasn't, because he, being a journalist, I think, and having a production team behind him, he does have access to sort of expertise. There's a character who crops up in a few different books who's a forensic anthropologist. So that's quite a useful sort of source of information to have on hand. But no, I haven't found it. I think because I'm taking much more of a journalistic view with him, he doesn't have to follow the rules of police procedure, and he doesn't have to do any of that kind of cautioning people or any of those sorts of.
Well, yeah, and I guess as well that you've got the freedom of him being a free spirit in that he's not constrained by those things. He's not constrained as a police officer to do the right thing. He can do, you know, what he wants to a certain extent. So you've got that freedom with him that he can probably break the rules, is what I'm saying. You know, that he can do things that he's not supposed to do, or that he wouldn't do if he was a police officer.
Yeah, so, and he's not trying to have something stand up in court, I suppose. He's trying to get to the truth. But yeah, I am interested as well in the idea of podcasters not getting the whole truth. And, you know, are there certain cases where he finds certain things out, but not the whole truth? Are people lying in a different way later? I think my original ending for the first book was really quite bleak, and I really did have to change that. I knew myself as I wrote it. My original thought was that, what if somebody just lied to the podcast and somebody made a podcast and it wasn't the truth at all at the end? But actually, as a reader, that's quite unsatisfying and dark.
It's funny though, isn't it? Because actually, sometimes as a reader, something like that would be really unexpected. So it might not be satisfying, but actually, do we always need to have it sort of tied up? You know, not happy ending as such, but you know, a sort of a circle completed in whatever way that might be.
I think that's definitely something. Book 3, again, no spoilers. The ending of book 3, I think when you're doing a podcaster, you know, maybe the reader gets the truth. Does everyone get the truth in the same way? Does it? Yeah, I mean, you've read it, you'll know what I mean. But
I get what you mean. Yeah, I think it is really interesting because I think, you know, we were talking about like crime and you know, how diverse the genre can be, and you know, I know that, sort of the bottom line is, selling books, but actually that's sort of, I think as a reader, it's really exciting to have something that's maybe not what you expect, whatever that would be. I know there's the whole sort of rules thing about, giving the reader a chance and, being able to sort of, but yeah, I think do you find that a challenge, having to get the sort of the clues in so that you do give the reader a chance? And is that important to you as a writer?
Yeah, I think at the end you want the reader to be a bit surprised, but you don't want them to think, well, that's ridiculous. How, I can never work that out. But at the same time, you don't want them to work it out too soon. So I tend to not quite know my ending. I'll know somewhere where I want to get to near the end of the key scene, but then I might try and kind of have an extra something that happens after that, or have that be slightly wrong in some way, or almost to keep myself interested as well. I love an ending in a crime book that pulls the rug out from under you. I like a bleak ending. I like that sort of gut punch. And obviously you can't have it in every book, but the books that do it well just really, they're the ones that kind of stay with you.
I think they do really stay with you, don't they? I think if you're really surprised, something really, it's really different, or it's really, it definitely stays with you. I think that, even if you're sort of like, well, I didn't see that coming in a bad way, but it's just something different. Lee's asking,
something like Tariq Ashkanani's Welcome to Cooper. I won't say anything to spoiler it, but if anyone's read that, I think that does it so well. That sort of twist at the end that is just so satisfying. When it's, anyway, sorry, interrupt.
No, it's fine. No, I was just Lee saying, do you plan your books out before you start writing, or are you more of a seat of the pants kind of writer?
I try and plan more. I used to be a seat of the pants writer, but it's really inefficient. But having said that, when I try to plan too much, I tie myself in knots. So I try for a happy kind of medium of knowing some key scenes, knowing some key events that have to happen, and then I kind of get going. Once I get to maybe 40 or 50,000 words, I'll often stop and really plot out more carefully, and then because I can see where I am. And I think for me, if I sit down and plot everything before I start writing, it comes off the rails because I don't know the characters yet. And so I might have this kind of perfect on paper plan, but then 3 or 4 chapters in, I'm stuck because I'm like, well, they wouldn't do that because I didn't really know them, and now I do. And so I try not to use up too much of my time with planning, but I do think I'm quite envious of people that can sit down and sort of plan everything out. Having said that, I would get quite bored. I like the uncertainty a little bit, I think. So discovering it for myself along the way and solving the problems is quite nice. My subconscious, so often I'm quite busy, and so I don't have that much writing time, but then it's your subconscious, you kind of take away the problem and you kind of think, oh, how am I going to solve that? And by the time you get an aha moment, you wake in the night thinking, oh, that could work.
Sorry, those night thoughts are quite, I think it's just when your brain is quiet, isn't it, and there's nothing else going on, and it just clicks into, but quite often you've forgotten them by the morning. You write them down if you've got a pen by the bed.
I sometimes do notes in my phone, or sometimes think about it when I'm doing really mindless activities, like folding, washing, or drying my hair or something. Those kind of things where you're occupied, but your brain is able to just tick.
I think I've said this before, but I think Agatha Christie always used to say washing the dishes was one of her favourite things. Just standing there washing the dishes, is a good time to sort of try and work out a plot.
Yeah, I do think sometimes you have to walk away from the page, and sitting in front of the screen is just really counterproductive sometimes.
I think that's the same with your job, isn't it, as well? It can be the same. You just need that headspace just to think.
Yeah, I think it's good to be in it. Once you're kind of in the story, you can do a little bit every day, even if it's just 10 minutes. It keeps you in it. At the moment, I've been struggling because I've been doing publicity for the 3rd book in the middle of trying to edit the 4th book, which is due in a couple of weeks. And I was really into it the beginning of last week, went off to Scotland and did a load of bookshop tours, and I've come back and I'm completely out of it now, and I've got to find a way to get myself back into the story.
I imagine that's a real challenge, because it is like getting into that, like you say, into the sort of the zone, isn't it, of like, you know, because swapping from book 3 to 4, and you're talking about book 3 now, and then you've got to go back to book 4, it must be quite difficult to sort of keep that sort of momentum up, really.
Yeah, I think it's sometimes you have, like, sometimes I can see all of the threads of where I'm going in the story really clearly, and I just need to do them. But then other times you come back and it's like a tangled ball, and you've kind of got to tease them out again and work out what you're up to.
Sarah's saying she really enjoys when Cal does the podcast episode with his findings within your books. Is that something that you sort of like to do as a sort of a roundup sort of thing?
Yeah, I try and, I mean, I had this idea way back that a lot more of the books would be in podcast episodes, which is actually really, really difficult to do. And Matt Wesolowski does it really well.
Oh, yeah.
But yeah, I do try and have that sort of feel of the podcasts, in that, you know, you listen to them, they've got a format, they kind of interview the key people, then there's some developments, and then at the end you get a kind of roundup of what the podcaster thinks. But yeah, to try and the balance of trying to make sure that the podcasts reveal something, and it's not just hashing over what you've seen in the book.
Yeah, so, something else, sort of, you know, finding something else to sort of reveal, sort of thing. Yeah.
So sometimes that's easy, and sometimes it's a bit. I often do them at the end. Actually, I have where they should be, and then I kind of, or I might take a scene.
Interesting. Yeah,
is extraneous and turn it into a podcast episode instead.
Who's sort of inspired your writing, Heather, over the years?
I guess it's just mainly reading a lot. I mean, I've always read so much. As a child, particularly, I was a really fast reader, so I used to get through a lot. Now it's often just really striking standalone crime fiction is probably one of the things that inspires me the most. Like, for example, there's a book by Daniel Kafka, Notes on an Execution. Those are the kind of books that just so beautifully written. They sort of say something as well. And but I'm endlessly inspired by other crime writers. And especially when you go and sit in festivals and listen to people talk. And I'm lucky to have some really lovely crime writing friends, and seeing them, I think you get like a ringside seat into how they write, because we share each other's work, and, you know, we'll read at early stages for each other, and it's a real privilege to kind of see, like, wow, that's how they do it, and that's how they do research, and how. So I do find that really inspiring, actually, and everyone's different, so there's no kind of one way of doing it.
No, I like that. I like the fact that, you know, when we have these talks, you know, you talk to different people, and, you know, everybody's so different. Everybody writes differently. Everybody has their planning differently. It just makes it, you know, really exciting to sort of do, but also really interesting to sort of, you know, to get behind the scenes of how you sort of, you know, plan your day or whatever, you know, however, and your books, because, you know, there's so many different variations of how people write. Have you got a favorite? Have you got a favorite crime writer? Have you got or favorite writer?
Oh no, I find this question really difficult because there's just so many. I mean, there's lots of crime writers I really admire. People like Louise Welsh, I think, is amazing. Denise Miner. I could go on, to be honest, but when I was a teenager, it was all, my mum used to buy all of the Patricia Cornwell books and the Kathy Rice and Tess Gerritsen, and those kind of, Karen Slaughter, the early ones of those. So I think I had a sort of teen diet of those kind of crime fiction stories, which has really influenced some of my writing now. But I read more widely than crime fiction. It's a big chunk of what I read. Yes, it's sort of one thread, really.
Just a bit of
dystopian fiction is another area I really enjoy reading. Recently books like The Stranding and Claire Fuller's The Memory of Animals, those sorts of those sorts of stories really capture me as well. I think they're so dark.
Do you think you'd like, because you said about the beginning, like when you said about the beginning about the ghost stories and you know, do you think crime is, you said you've sort of done speculative thriller for the next one, but do you sort of see yourself staying within this genre, or would you like to sort of try something else? Would you go back to your ghostly sort of stories?
I would. I think it will be interesting to see whether the speculative thriller, how much within crime people see that as falling. It's quite a dystopian story. It's also very dark, but it's in a different way. So I will be really interested to see how we market that and how it's received. But yeah, I think it's a lot of my stuff at heart is crime. There's always a crime that finds its way into the book in some way. I'm not sure I know how to write a story without a crime in it.
Yeah, so I remember somebody else saying that, so they might go to romance, but if they had a romance, somebody would have to die in it, which sort of, you know.
I quite like reading the occasional romance. I used to read a lot more of them, but I wouldn't be able to write one, I don't think. Likewise, historical fiction, I'm kind of in awe of people. I have a little historical thread running through book 4, and that's hard enough. But to actually write historical fiction, I think you have to be really good at your research and really thorough. And I'm not sure me.
I'm amazed by, you know, like sort of historical writers, because, you know, the research and the sort of what goes into it to make it your own as well, isn't it? Because you don't want it to read like a non-fiction book, because, you know, there's books about that already. So I find that really sort of interesting, but also a big challenge, I imagine. Can you tell us any more about the sort of speculative thriller? That's out next? That's the next one out?
That's out in May. It's basically set in the 2050s. There is a terrible virus sweeping the world, and it's threatening humanity, sort of existence of humanity, really. And the British government decides to evacuate children from the cities to camps to keep them safe. But the right-hand woman to the Prime Minister realises that they are cherry-picking which children to save and which to allow to die. And she can't stomach this, so she starts trying to smuggle children out. And just before London falls, she manages to get one last child on a train out. And then the novel follows the fate of that child in the camp. And 10 years later, they're still in the camp. And they have not been able to return to the world. So, yeah, that's the sort of premise of it.
That does sound dark, but good dark.
It's it is dark.
You obviously do like the sort of, you know, you don't find that the darkness, you know, does it affect you at all when you're writing?
No. I think some of the research and I can't listen to too many true crime podcasts. I can't watch too much true crime, that sort of thing. I find it really does affect me, and I suppose that's why I write it about it, because it really does haunt me, and some of the cases really stay with me. So I think I have to be careful. I try not to write too many kind of gory details, and I think the things that you learn about certain cases do stick, and do. Yeah, it's hard to forget some of the things that you've read or you know. But I suppose it's that sort of fascination and your fears as well. I think you kind of play into those fears. I mean, one of the themes in the Tomorrow Project that really interested me is what would you do at the end? You know, would you stay and fight? Would you run? What would you do? And I'm so interested in that because I've been in a couple of situations where I sort of felt threatened, and I have a really strong flight instinct, and I didn't know this about myself. It was after the 7/7 bombings in London, and I lived in London, I worked in London as a journalist when the bombings happened, and the weekend afterwards I was I lived in Streatham, I was going to Victoria Station, and as I walked down the stairs to the tube, one of the ticket officers started yelling, "Everybody get out," and there was this fear in his voice. And I didn't even stop for a second to look what was going on. I just was out of that station. I wasn't out of the station. I was about 3 streets away before I even stopped.
I'm the same. I would be with you. I'm like that.
And I would love to think that I would stay and fight. And I don't think I would. I think I'd just be gone.
I
So
definitely
I'm
would be.
fascinated by that. And one of the starting points as well was my children were quite young, and I was explaining to them about World War II evacuation and how parents would put their children on trains with labels on them, with the hope that somebody at the other end would take care of them. And they were absolutely horrified by this, and were sort of picturing it from a child's point of view. And then for the first time, I was thinking about it from a mother's point of view, like, how do you, and that's the sort of decision faced some of the parents in the book is, we're not going to survive. So do you take the chance of your child surviving? And some of those scenes actually still make me cry. But those, yeah, they're quite dark thoughts and fears, I think.
Yeah, no, I think, yeah, I think there's things that you can, so I'm the same. I remember when we went to the Imperial War Museum and we went to the sort of the Holocaust bit, and I just didn't, you can go in one bit or you can go out, and I didn't go in. I didn't want to see. I think it's just, I think I didn't need to see, because I know how horrific it is. So it's just that thing, isn't it? And I think that's the same with me with the flight. I would be like you, I'd be up the stairs and gone. I would like to think that I would be the hero, but I wouldn't.
Yeah. I wonder what it would take for me to be cornered enough to stand and fight.
Maybe if we couldn't get out, maybe that would just be this. It literally would be like hemmed in somewhere. We'd have to fight to get out.
Yeah.
So I'm just looking at the time. We're coming up to the end of the hour. What have you read anything recently that you'd like to recommend to us? It doesn't have to be crime, but it can be crime.
I have. I've read, so a good friend of mine, Louisa Scarr, has a series about police dog handler, Lucy Halliday. And it's really interesting because a lot of stories with dogs in are cozy crime. And these are not cozy crime. They are really well-researched police procedurals about a police dog handler and her dog, Moss, who is a spaniel. And so I've just read the first one is called Gallows Wood, and it's out now. The second one is called Memorial Park, and is coming out next year. So I've been lucky to read a proof of that, but they really are excellent. And in the first one was brilliant, but the second one is even better. And yeah, she does a lot of research. She really, really knows her stuff. So I'm kind of in awe of that. And as you read it, you really feel you're in an authentic situation.
I like that, actually. That's because Sarah's saying Gallows Wood. She just popped that up on the chat, just saw, and so she's obviously read it. But yeah, that's another really different take, isn't it, on it? Like we were talking about at the beginning about like how many different sort of takes there are, and that's something again, unique. So yeah, that sounds fabulous. So so that one's out now, Gallows Wood, and then
Gallows Wood's out now. Memorial Park is out next February, I think.
Fantastic, thank you. Well, thank you so much. So, Unsound is out now, and you've got the other ones behind you. I can see Unburied and Unsolved behind you. So yeah, I mean, you can read it as a standalone, but if you want the full effect of Cal, it's, I think, starting at the beginning is probably there are certain things you would know if you read the third one first. But I read it as a standalone because and I really enjoyed it, but I definitely want to find out. I want to go back now and read the other two. So yeah, I think there's you've got quite a few fans on the group. So thank you so much. Everybody's saying thank you. Thanks so much for joining us. Good luck with book 4A and 4.
Thank you.
And come and chat to us again. It'd be lovely to speak to you again. Thank you, Heather. Thank you, everybody, for joining us. Thanks.
Thank you. Bye.